¿Qué tal a todos? Esta es la clase número 290 y hoy tenemos diferentes oraciones, ejercicios relacionados con el tercer condicional. Así que esta va a ser una clase con muchos ejemplos y la explicación gramatical ya la hicimos en el video anterior. Comencemos. Bueno, a continuación tenemos diferentes oraciones con el tercer condicional. Voy a tener la oración en inglés y luego la puedes comparar con tu traducción a español y comparar las respuestas que tú tienes con la que yo te voy a dar. Ok, la voy a leer solamente en inglés y recuerda que si tienes que pausar el video, lo puedes hacer, comparas tus respuestas y luego continúas con la siguiente oración o el siguiente ejemplo. Ok, 1. If I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam. 2. If my alarm had gone off, I wouldn't have missed my bus. También vale la pena recordar que en color verde tenemos la condición y en color naranja tenemos el resultado. También tenemos que tener en cuenta que este orden puede cambiar. Yo una oración de condicional la puedo empezar con el resultado y después puedo tener la condición. 3. If I had arrived earlier, I wouldn't have missed the flight. 4. If you had warned me earlier, I would have been able to come. 5. If it hadn't snowed, I could have driven here. 6. If she had apologized, I wouldn't have been so upset. 7. If they had waited, we could have eaten together. 8. If we had gone to the store, we wouldn't have been out of food. 9. If you had stolen the car, you would have gone to jail. 10. If I had studied Spanish, I would have moved to Spain. 11. If he had cut the grass earlier, it wouldn't have been so tall later. 'If she had cleaned her house, it would have sold quicker. 13. If they hadn't gone out to eat so often, they would have saved more money. 14. If you hadn't shown up late, you would have got the job. 15. If he had trained more, he would have won the match. 16. She would have been more successful if she had worked harder. 17. They would have given up if it had been any more difficult. 18. I would have gone to the store if it hadn't rained. 19. You would have made more money if you had sold it for a higher price. 20. We would have gone to the museum if it hadn't been closed. 21. She would have seen the horror film if the tickets hadn't been sold out. 22. He would have biked here if his tire hadn't gone flat. 23. I would have gone to the beach if I had brought my swim trunks. 24. They would have gone skiing if it hadn't been so expensive. 25. We would have bought the bag if there had been a discount. 26. He would have eaten more if there had been any left. 27. I would have done the laundry if I had written myself a note. 28. The plants would have grown more if there had been more light. 29. The food would have tasted better if you had used more salt. 30. The test would have been easier if you had studied more. Ahora quiero que hablemos acerca de third conditional questions. Vamos a hacer algunas preguntas usando este condicional. 1. If you had won the lottery, what would you have bought? 2. If you had more time this week, what would you have done? 3. If you hadn't started learning English, which language would you have chosen? 4. If you had been born 100 years ago, how would your life have been different? 5. If you had been born a king, what would you have done? 6. If you had been born with superpowers, what would you have done differently in life? 7. If you had found $1,000 in the street this morning, what would you have done? 8. If you had been the president during the pandemic, what would you have done? 9. If you had chosen a different location for your last vacation, where would you have picked? 10. If you had been born the opposite sex, what would your name have been? 11. If you had lived in medieval times, what would you have done for work? 12. If there hadn't been a pandemic, what would you have done during that time? 13. If you hadn't learned English, how would your life have been different? 14. If the internet had never been invented, what would you have changed? 15. If your parents had decided to live somewhere else, how would your life have been different? 16. Who would you have been your best friend if you had never met your current best friend? 17. How would the world have changed if we had invented teleportation? 18. How different would your life have been if you had never studied? 19. How different would your life have been if you had been born with 9 siblings? 20. How would your life have changed if you had been born in a different country? 21. What would you have worn if the weather had been different this morning? 22. What would you have done if there had been a fire this morning? 23. Where would you have gone to school if you had had the choice? 24. What time would you have woken up this morning if you had been able to choose? 25. What is a product you wouldn't have bought if you had known it was bad? 26. What is a product you had bought earlier if you had known how good it was? 27. What would you have done with your time if you hadn't had so much homework growing up? 28. How would you have studied English if you hadn't had access to a computer? 29. Which TV show would you have avoided if you had known it was bad? 30. Where would you have lived if you had been born as your favorite animal? Como puede ver, no es tan difícil como la gente piensa. Lo bueno es que los condicionales tienen que ver con tener la fórmula correcta. Una vez que recuerde las dos partes, es decir, la condición y el resultado, podrá expresar pensamientos más complicados y creativos. Esto ha sido todo, amigos. Por favor, suscríbete totalmente gratis a este canal. Regálame un like o un me gusta. Por favor, comenta y comparte. Activa la campanita para que recibas una alerta cada vez que subamos una nueva clase o video. Mi nombre es Raúl Joven León, mi correo electrónico personal rjoven66@gmail.com. Amigos, este es el final de la clase número 290 relacionada con el tercer condicional en inglés. Yo espero verte en un próximo video, no sin antes agradecer el privilegio de tu tiempo. Hasta pronto, amigos. Nos vemos.